and welcome to this video. I'm so excited to share with you the why behind our family ministries team. First off, I need to say a huge thank you to our Slate Church Family Ministries team. Thank you so much for asking me to do this training with you guys, and I'm really excited to share, so thank you for having me. If you guys haven't met me yet, my name is Jacoby. I live about an hour and a half from our main Slate Church campus in Waterloo, so that's probably why I haven't met you yet, but please, if you see me at a 10 a.m. service, make sure you come over and say hi and tell me what team you're on. I'd love to meet you. You might be wondering why I'm doing this training. Well, I had the opportunity to study at Hillsong College in Australia for a couple of years in their kids and youth ministry program. That, plus a couple of years on staff at a local church as their children's pastor, plus about 10 years of volunteer experience in kids and youth ministry, means I've been doing this for a really long time. Now, that's not to say that I'm any more qualified than anybody else, but I have been doing this for a long time and have made a lot of mistakes, and I'm really excited to share those with you guys. Anything that I can share to help you learn, I'm so excited to do that. So that's why I'm here. You might be wondering why we're doing a formal training like this. The reason, at least for me, behind training is so that you can show up on a Sunday morning and you are so well empowered and so well equipped that all that you're worried about is sharing with the kids and the teens that you're ministering to. I don't want you to worry about, how to interact with parents or how to safely set up a room or what's the best way to use a curriculum. That kind of stuff should become part of your DNA and become part of second nature so that all you're worrying about is talking about Jesus. So that, at least for me, is the heart behind training. So I would encourage you to take a moment, pause this video, put some prayer into it, and then let's get started. Alright, now before we get into the main content of this video, just some housekeeping stuff. I just wanted to let you know this is a fairly non-specific session, so don't be worried if you don't feel like you get a lot of practical application out of it, but there is a reason that we're putting this training at the beginning of all the trainings that we're going to do this year. Normally, if we were doing this training live, we would have a Q&A at the end, but since we're doing this over video, I'd really encourage you to keep track of your questions and send them to me after, or send them to your team leader or whoever's, in charge of whatever ministry you're in. I'd be super happy to answer them, and I know they would as well, so make sure you save those up. And the final point before we dive into the main content is just to tell you a quote that I had a teacher that always used to say this to us. Before he would do any of our college classes or preach any message, he would always say, "Don't take my word for it." Now, he didn't say that because, he wasn't confident in the information he was giving us. He was saying that because he really wanted us to get this into our heads and into our spirits on our own. Maybe sitting here listening to someone on a screen is not the best way for you to learn. That's totally fine. I really encourage you, take some time to find a blog, maybe find another video, maybe find a book, maybe find a friend to go through this information with and really get it into your spirit. So let's get started. So in this session, we're going to talk about why. Now, I don't know about you guys, but when I was a kid, I liked to ask why about absolutely everything. And I don't just mean like the cute little 3-year-old whys, I mean like forever. And probably if you ask my parents, they would say I still do that now. And the reason is not because I wanted to be annoying, because I genuinely wanted to know why I was doing something and the reason behind it and the value that it had. I had lots of siblings growing up, so somebody always had to take a turn in the back seat. And whenever it was my turn, I would always ask why. And it's not because I didn't want to sit in the back seat. I just wanted to know, the greater reason behind why I was sitting in the back seat. What purpose does it serve? Is there any value in this? And that may seem silly, but that's continued on into my life now. And I love finding out the why behind why someone is doing something, the really good reason behind the way they do something, the way they do it. So that's what we want to talk about in this video, is why are you on the family ministries team? Now, when I say family ministries, I might mean the kids team or the youth team. For the rest of this video, I'll refer to them as any one of those 3 names. Now, you might be thinking, that seems kind of dumb, like the why is pretty obvious for a church ministry team. Obviously the why is Jesus, or the why is because serving in church. But I want to get specifically into why are you on the kids team or why are you on the youth team, because you could have been on any team at church. And I hope that you guys are planning on being in these teams for a really long time. It's so rewarding to be part of them long term, but that's why we need to figure this out now, is so that you know the reason why you're there and the reason that's going to keep you in those teams. So that's what we're talking about in this video. So again, normally this training would be done in person, but since we're doing it on a video, I'd love you to take a minute, pause this video, and answer these 3 questions for yourself. These 3 questions are really meant to just get you thinking about things that you love, things that you're passionate about, and things that you probably have pretty good reason behind why you do them or why you feel that way about them. So take a minute, pause it, and do those questions. Awesome. Well, I hope those questions got you in the mode of thinking about things that you're passionate about, things that you love doing. So for the next part, I'd love you to grab a piece of paper. Again, if we were doing this live, normally we'd be doing this up front with everyone, but that's okay. For this video training, I would love you to grab a piece of paper, split it down the middle, and on one side write how. I would like you to write down as many ways as you can think of how someone would end up on a kids team or a youth team. For example, I ended up on a kids team one time just because somebody asked me because they needed more leaders. Another reason might be that you felt like you had to. Another reason might be that, there was no other teams to serve on. So take a couple minutes, pause the video again, and write down reasons how you might end up on a kids team. All right, I hope you've got a pretty good list going. Now, I'm assuming this list probably looks pretty good. It's probably got lots of good reasons for being on a kids team, but I can imagine that a lot of those reasons are not reasons that are going to hold you there in the long run. Somebody asking you to be on a team or just being on that team because there was no other team to be on is not a reason that's going to keep you in family ministries, for 6 months, a year, 2 years, 10 years, 15 years. And that's what we're going to try and get to in this video, is figuring out those real whys behind the whats, the reasons why behind what you're doing of being part of family and kids ministries. So I don't know about you guys, but I like to have a plan. I like to know where I'm going. So this is the order of things that we're going to go through in this training. So we're talking about why kids and youth, or why family ministries. So we're going to talk about why is why important. Why is it important to have a why behind what you're doing? We're going to talk about the world's why. So the reasons around us in our society and in our country and in our world that they give us for valuing kids and youth. We're going to look at the church's why, or biblical whys behind doing family ministries. We're going to look specifically at Slate Church. Now, if you're not part of Slate Church and you're watching this video, that's fine. I would love you to think about how your church applies this. Then we're going to talk about your why, and that's kind of the whole point of this video, is to figure out your reason for being in kids and youth ministry. Then we're going to talk about sharing why, which does go a little bit into recruitment, which we're going to do in other training sessions and is a little more practical, but we are going to touch on it a little bit in this training. And then after that, we'll wrap up. So let's get started. So why is why important? I want to share a story with you guys that got shared with me in one of my first weeks while I was at Hillsong College in Australia. Now, this story is more meant to show churches that do things excellently and how important it is to bring a certain level of excellence, but I think you'll see after I tell this story that it actually also has a lot to do with learning the why behind the what. So let me share. So story number 1, you have a single mom who's coming to church. She's got a couple of kids. She wakes up a little bit late Sunday morning, so she's rushing to church. She gets to the church parking lot and she can't find anywhere to park. There's no sort of direction or anything, so she spends another 5-10 minutes driving around trying to find a parking spot. After she finally parks, she wrestles the kids out of the car, gets them up to the main church entrance, and realizes that the kids program isn't even in this building. So after going to find the kids program, she signs them in. The leader is not really sure about how the sign-in process works and doesn't really ask many questions and just lets the kid wander in the room. And then she just tells the mom to come back and just come grab them afterwards. No kind of sign-out process. After the mom drops her kids off, she heads back to the main sanctuary, and by this point she's missed, the whole musical worship portion of the service, and she's having a hard time finding a seat. By the time she finally does sit down, she's already been all over the place this morning. Her brain is just all kerfuffled, and she can't even concentrate on what's going on, and she's just counting down the minutes till she goes and grabs her kids again. Okay, now story number 2 is the same story, but with slight adjustments, so let's go. Story number 2, the same single mom, she's got a couple of kids, she's late on her way to church. This time when she shows up at the parking lot, there's a parking attendant who's ready to direct her to parking just for the family ministries team. So the mom is taken to this parking spot. It's right in front of the kids building. The kids get signed in. They're welcomed by a really happy leader who's so excited to have them there. She tells them the whole sign-in process, asks some questions about safety and contact information, and she even lets the mom look in just so she can be comfortable with letting the kids go there. She gives the mom a pickup tag for the kids so she can pick them up and make sure nobody else gets her kids, and then sends her off to the sanctuary. When the mom gets to the sanctuary, there's more greeters there, and then there's someone who takes her directly to an open seat for her. He introduces her to the people next to her, so she's got some friends for the service, and she's able to participate in the entire service with no distractions. So I don't know if you guys noticed the difference between these two stories, but they're actually pretty huge. Now, obviously, in the second story, there was a certain level of excellence brought by all the volunteers at that church. But I'm pretty sure that if you asked any of those volunteers why they're doing that every week, every service, maybe multiple services in a day, it's not just because they like doing it. I would guess that it's probably because they understand the greater why behind what they're doing. And that's what we want to talk about in this training. Think about this. Anything that you have probably been successful at in life or stuck with for a long time likely has a why behind it. I'll give you an example. My brother Levi oversees all of the PM worship services at Slate Church's Maxwell's location, and he does love worship, and he does love playing guitar, and he loves leadership, and I'm sure he probably even likes being on stage. But none of those are the reasons that he's doing what he's doing. I would probably guess that if you asked him, it's because he understands the value of musical worship as far as it goes as the Christian experience. Levi loves playing guitar, but playing guitar is not a good enough reason to keep doing the same thing for almost 15 years. So having a why behind what you're doing probably means it's something you're going to stick with for a long time, and it's likely something that you're going to be successful at. Alright, so now we're going to move on to the world's why, the reason that our society gives us for valuing kids and youth ministry, and maybe the reason that you're there. We're so lucky we're located in Canada, and we are so blessed to live in a society that values that age group so much. If you go into any public space, it's very easy to tell how much resources and media and time and talent is spent on reaching this age group. Whether it's positive or negative, you can tell that a lot of time, money, and resources gone into this kind of thing. Last month we had Bell Let's Talk, and while that isn't specifically for kids and teenagers, a lot is geared towards that. And if you know anything about Bell Let's Talk, you know that a lot of time and a lot of media and a lot of financial resource goes into this age group. So I'm very thankful that we live in a society like this, but it does put a challenge up for us. We need to not only meet these expectations, but exceed them. We're not just doing, kids and youth ministry to serve our society or to serve our government or to serve our country. We're actually doing it for something that has an eternal impact. So I don't know about you guys, but I'm a little bit of a nerd, so I wanted to include some stats in here of some really important information that might influence why kids and youth ministry is so important. So in Waterloo, which is where Slate Church is located, in the Waterloo region, there are over 92,000 kids between the ages of 0 and 14. There's over 33,000 more between the 15 to 19 age bracket. Waterloo is one of the only metropolitan areas in Canada where the number of kids actually outnumbers the number of seniors. So if you look across Canada, almost every other metropolitan area, there's always more seniors than kids, but in Waterloo, that's actually reverse. So if you do the math, it's about 120,000 kids or so. It's about 26% of the Waterloo region population. So I don't know if that freaks you out or not, but I hope it freaks you out in a good way. You get to look forward to taking care of and ministering to a quarter of your region's population. All right, a little bit more science for you. So many studies have shown that almost every person forms a majority of their world beliefs, their personal views, their views about, how relationships work, all of their world perspectives by the age of 13. That's insane. And if you're in our kids ministry team, that is your bracket right there. You are helping to form foundational beliefs that they have, not just about church and Jesus, but about everything for the rest of their life. The second point on this slide is a myth that I'd like to debunk. A lot of people freak out when Christians go off to college. They're always like, that's where they're going to lose their faith. That's when it's going to happen. But not to sound negative, but probably if they're losing their faith in college, they didn't have it to begin with in high school or maybe even back in kids. Now, while that sounds overwhelmingly negative, it's actually a really beautiful thing for us to take into account when we think about the way that Slate Kids and Slate Youth are set up to work together. In Slate Kids, before they're 13, you're helping them to set up those foundational beliefs about themselves, about their relationships with others, about God, about church, and about the world. And if those are set up firmly, when they hit youth group, they have the opportunity to actually apply those and outwork them as they hit new adult experiences. And so, lucky for us, by the time they get to college, they have set up firm foundations, they've had time to try them out and apply them, and they are so good to go. So that myth, totally debunked. One more quote on the bottom of the screen here. I'll let you read it for yourself, but the main thing is that it's talking about your brain is almost fully developed at 90% by age 5. So for our preschool and nursery teams, I really want you to take this in and think about how impactful that is. Everything that you say with them, everything that you do with them, every, prayer and worship song and Bible story teaching and craft that you do is being permanently neurologically embedded in their brains as they're actually like forming the brain, not just, thinking about it, but actual physical forming is happening. So let that encourage you. I'd also like to add there is much more information about this kind of thing, about the science behind kids and youth development, and probably a lot more eloquently than I've put it. So please make sure, you ask if you'd like some resources or take time to look it up on your own. It's really inspiring stuff. Next, we're going to move on to the church's why, or the biblical reasoning behind valuing kids and youth ministry and why you might be there. Now, some of these are going to seem pretty obvious. They're kind of classic Christian answers, but I do think it's really important that we go through them and think about how they specifically apply to our family ministries age groups of the kids and youth. So the first one's pretty easy. The Bible is written to all people. So classic example, John 3:16, for God so loved the world. Whenever the Bible talks about the world or all people or all of mankind or whatever it says, it's not just talking about people over the age of 18. It applies to absolutely everyone, and that means our kids and youth as well. The second point is that Jesus was a kid and a teenager. Now, I'm not going to go through all of these verses. If you want to, feel free to pause it. I'd love for you to go through them. But these are the ones where it talks about, Jesus being a child and growing up and teaching scripture in the temple and interactions with his parents, different things like that. Now, at least in my opinion, if Jesus, who was God incarnate, who came and saved the world, thought it was important enough to have the entire human experience, I think it's really important for us to value that time of life as well. He could have just shown up at age 30, did his 3 years, got his stuff done, saved the world, and left again, but he didn't. He had the entire human experience. Not to mention, other parts of the Bible where it talks about us being created in his likeness, and that means his whole likeness, all the way from birth up until, adulthood and stuff like that. So we really need to make sure that we are valuing those times in a child's life and in a teenager's life, and remember that Jesus experienced that as well. Okay, so this next one is Jesus values kids and teens. So this one is pretty straightforward. You've heard all of the stories, Jesus healing children, Jesus telling little children to come to him, taking time out of his day to do stuff for children and for teenagers. Again, if the God of the whole world who came down to earth can take time to interrupt his on-earth mission to do stuff for kids and for teenagers, I think it's important enough that we value that as well. If we're talking about being Jesus-like and being Christians, then we need to do that as well. We need to make it okay to interrupt and make time in our schedule for people that fall into that kids and teenager category. Okay, so this next one is one of my favorite. It says that Jesus wants us to be like kids and teenagers. So I am going to read this verse because I think it's so awesome. Matthew 18:2-5 says, he called a little child to him and placed the child among them. And he said, truly I tell you, unless you change and become like little children, you will never enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever takes the lowly position of this child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven, and whoever welcomes one such child in my name welcomes me. Okay, now obviously this verse talked about valuing children, but it also asks us to be like children. I don't know about you guys, but if Jesus says something, I take it pretty literally. If you're in kids and youth ministry and you're not in it for the kids and you're not in it for the teenagers, I highly recommend getting into it for yourself because you're going to learn so much from kids and teenagers. When Jesus asks us to be like children, I take it very literally. Think about how children and their parents interact. I love how kids, run up to their parents when they're crying, no second thoughts. They just run into their arms, bawling their eyes out. They're totally okay being sad with mom and dad. Or, maybe they ask really big questions. You want a unicorn? You ask mom and dad. And they're also so honest, and they ask all the questions, and the big questions, and the little questions. And that's the kind of relationship that I want to have with God. I don't want to be afraid, that he's not going to be loving me, or I don't want to be afraid to ask a big question, or I want to make sure I'm going to him when I cry. That's the kind of relationship that I want to have. And teenagers as well. I know we get so annoyed at them being, moody and dramatic and whatever, but you know what? At least they're being authentic, and at least they're being open and emotional, and that's the kind of relationship that I want to have with God as well. So again, if you're not in kids or youth for the kids and youth, get into it for you, because you're going to learn so much just watching those kids and teens and how they interact with other people and how your relationship with God could be. Okay, so the next one here is that Jesus always had a why. So I'm going to read this one as well. John 5:19, it says, Jesus gave them this answer, very truly I tell you, the Son can do nothing by himself. He can only do what he sees his Father doing, because whatever the Father does, the Son also does. I think it's so important if we're claiming to be Christians and Jesus followers and imitators of him that we look at this part of his life and imitate that as well. You know, Jesus didn't do anything without okay from the Father or anything that wasn't on mission for him. So if Jesus always had a why, I think it's really important that we always have a why as well. All right, so we're going on to Slate's why. Now, no matter what church you're going to, whether it's Slate or some other church, it's always super important that kids in youth ministry fall under the same vision and mission of the larger church. For one, it's just logistically and practically way easier if everybody's on the same page and going after the same thing. But secondly, it's also super important from a leadership perspective and from a biblical perspective that there is some sort of unification between those things. You know, kids and youth is not separate from the rest of the church. We talked about that in the Bible section about all people. You know, this applies to everyone, churches for everyone. And it's really important that there's a sense of unity and a sense of coming togetherness between the family ministries and the church ministries. So what I'd love you to do for these next couple of points is take a minute, pause the screen, and read it how it's written for the kids and youth ministry team. Slate has a beautiful mission and vision and values as well, and while they are written with the church in them or people in them or, you know, mostly applying to adults, it actually applies to kids and youth as well. So I've scratched it out where it says church, I've scratched it out where it says people, and I've inserted it as it applies to you. So it says kids and youth or it says kids and youth ministry. So I'd love you to read it. It's super powerful to go through it and just take a minute to do that. All right, I hope you had fun reading those. It's so powerful to remember how that applies to the kids and youth ministry. And if you ever forget what you're doing, you know, it's pretty simple to just go through and read those for yourself and read them how they apply to the family ministries and just remind yourself what you're doing. Now, I wanted to talk about Slate's values as well. Now, these go a little more into how you're doing what you're doing as opposed to why you're doing it. So we are going to save them mostly for our future sessions, but there is one point that I'd like to go into. It's point number 3 where it says, church should be enjoyed and not endured. It's really important to remember that kids that are coming, you know, to your Sunday morning ministries or teenagers or on a Friday night, whatever your ministry is that they could be absolutely anywhere. Especially for the teenagers. So maybe the kids not so much, you know, because their parents are bringing them, but especially for the teenagers, they could be absolutely anywhere during this time, but they are choosing to spend time with you. They're choosing to spend time at church. They're choosing to spend time in a place where Jesus' name is being mentioned all the time. And I don't want you to take that lightly. Don't make it something that they have to endure. You know, you don't want your ministry to feel like another day of school where they have to sit down and be quiet and listen. You don't want it to feel like another day of being told off by mom and dad where they're constantly getting in trouble. Make it something that they enjoy, because they could be absolutely anywhere and they should really enjoy being with God and enjoy being in his church and not feeling like they have to endure it. Again, most of these points are a little more about how rather than why, so we will go into them in future sessions. Okay, so we're gonna move on to your why. This has been the whole point of this training, is to figure out why you are on the family ministries team. I like this quote on the screen by C.S. Lewis talking about our passions not being strong enough. They're actually too weak and we're really easily pleased. We need passionate people on our family ministries team. You know, all of this information that I'm giving you about, you know, town population size and Slate's mission and why the Bible says we should value kids and youth is not important if you can't personally connect to it. You know, all of your preparation and your enthusiasm, maybe the talents and skills that you bring to the kids and youth team, it all means nothing if there's not some sort of personal connection to why you are on this team. It's not something that's going to hold you there for a long time. Again, if you think about, you know, a celebrity or a historical figure or some sort of famous person who's done something great, probably they have a reason behind what they're doing. I imagine most people that do really great things and do things for a really long time don't do them just because they think it's cool or because they like it. They probably have a really big reason behind what they're doing. We have to intentionally connect ourselves with the cause or the why behind what we're doing if we want to be able to withstand the test of time. I told you guys at the beginning of this, I really hope that you're in family ministries for a long time. It's so rewarding, you know, to start with a group of kids or a group of teenagers and plant those seeds and see them come to fruition maybe years later. And the hard work seems all worth it, but at the same time, I can't lie to you guys, family ministries is a hard ministry to be in. You know, if you're doing it right, if you're building those deep relationships, if you're getting involved with the families, if you're really making it part of your life, it's not going to be an easy thing. I'll share an example. A youth group that I was involved with a couple of years ago, someone in the community committed suicide, and this person was friends with a lot of the kids in our youth group. And unfortunately, within that year, there were a couple of more suicides in the area. And so for that whole year, all our youth group could think about was suicide. And, we made it through, our kids made it through. We are so thankful for that. And, obviously God's presence was very much part of that. But I don't think myself or any of the other youth leaders could have made it through a situation like that without really understanding why we were doing what we're doing. Now, I don't want you to get freaked out, because in a couple minutes I'm going to share, some of my reasons why I do kids, and I hope you can think about a reason why you do kids, but maybe you feel like you don't really have a personal connection to doing family ministries, to do kids or youth. And if you think it's important, but you're having a hard time connecting to it personally, there's absolutely nothing wrong with that. But I would encourage you to find a reason outside of yourself that keeps you there and will keep you there for a long time. I'll give you an example of what I mean. So I'll be honest, this isn't an excuse, this is just me being real. I'm really not good at regular Bible time. I don't have, a really good habit of spending daily time reading God's word, for a set amount of time and studying it and that kind of thing. It's a habit I've had a hard time developing, and, I'd like to say that I just figured it out and I'm good to go, but unfortunately, it's something that's taken me a while to get a hold of. And for me, at least, just telling myself that it was a good thing that I needed to do, because it is, and telling myself that it would, further me, because it will, wasn't reason enough to get it done. So I really needed to find a reason outside of the thing itself to motivate me to get that done. So for me, it was thinking about my future kids and my future family. Now, I'm not dating anyone, I'm not married, that's like way off in the distant future. But I know that someday, if I do have kids, I want to be that mom that's up before her kids, reading her Bible, probably like 3 coffees in, because kids. But that's what motivates me right now. So that reason outside of myself, that reason outside of the current thing I'm working on, is what's motivating me to keep going right now. So maybe for you, you're on the kids and youth team, you don't have a personal connection to it, but maybe, your best friend's kids is in kids. And so you do it for that. Or maybe you had an amazing youth leader when you were growing up and you want to try and be that for someone else. So that's why you do it. So again, if you don't have a personal connection, totally fine. I just really encourage you to find a reason outside of yourself, because again, if you're going to do this for a long time and you're going to do it well, you're going to need something that's going to hold you there through the hard times and through the long times. So we are going to get to another activity, but before we get there, I wanted to share with you some of the reasons why I'm in family ministries. Now, I don't share these with you guys to impress you, quite the opposite. I really want to share them with you just to encourage you. These are just some of the reasons why I do what I do and what's kept me in this for a really long time. And on the opposite as well, if you have similar reasons to me, don't worry that you're gonna, jump ship, go to Australia and become a kids pastor. That's not necessarily for everyone. But I hope it does encourage you to think about maybe why you're in kids or why you're in youth and what's going to keep you there for a long time. So these are just some of my reasons. I'm in family ministries because when I was born with a hole in my heart. And so very early on, I saw the power of prayer and the power of God in my life. I'm in family ministries because when I was 7 years old, my family started doing foster care, and we had over 40 kids come through in the period that we did foster care, and I saw how the presence of God in these kids' lives and genuine love and genuine relationship could actually change their lives. I'm in family ministries because when I was 10 years old, I had a traumatizing situation that I had to deal with, and I knew that someday when I grew up, I wanted to be there for kids like me and make sure that that didn't happen to them. I'm in family ministries because when I was 12 years old, our kids pastor at the time asked me to be on the kids team, and they recognized gifts and talents in me that I didn't even know could be used at church, so I'm very thankful for that. I'm in family ministries because when I was in youth, my drama felt 100% real to me, and I had youth leaders who went through that with me, who argued with me, who never treated it as silly or fake. They were really in this drama with me. I'm in family ministries because when I was at the end of high school, I got to go to El Salvador on a mission trip with our youth pastor, and again, I saw how someone as young as me could have an impact for the church at the age that I was then. I'm in family ministries because when I was in high school, 2 of my friends' parents died in freak accidents, and I saw very clearly how the presence of God or the lack of the presence of God could really affect the outcome of those kinds of situations and how people dealt with them. I'm in family ministries because after I aged out of youth group, I actually went back and got to be a youth leader, and I gained so much from that mentorship and that experience and being able to be there for those kids just like I had leaders that were there for me. So again, these are not to impress you, they're strictly to encourage you. And so we're actually going to move on to the next activity here. Remember that page you had at the beginning? You would wrote how on one side. I'd love you to write why on the other side and write reasons why maybe you or maybe someone else that you know is in the family ministries team. So not how you got there, but why you're on that team. So to start you off, if it helps you, one of my reasons why, like I said, was because of my experience with foster care. So again, if we were doing this live, we'd have everyone be giving their answers together. But since it's just you, I would love you to write down as many as you can think of for yourself and maybe some that you know from others in your team. And then write that list down, pause this for a minute, write it down, and then we'll keep going. Awesome. Well, I hope you can see the contrast between those two lists. I know when we did this training live, the contrast was amazing between these two lists. And the reasons why people do it, whether it's because, they had experiences with great youth leaders, or they had a bad experience that they wanted to change for other kids, or whatever it is, these are the reasons that keep us there for the long run. I encouraged the leaders at our live training to take a picture of this list. If you're ever discouraged while you're doing what you're doing, remember this list. Remember why you are doing what you're doing. Remember why the people around you are doing what you're doing, and let it encourage you. Okay, finally we're going to move into sharing why. This is our last point, so we are going to wrap up soon. I know this video has been pretty long, so if you need to take a minute to stretch, please go for it, and then pause it, and then keep going. So we're going to talk about sharing why. So this goes a little bit into recruitment, which we are going to talk about in future sessions, at least with the kids team. So we're not going to get into it super far, but there is some important stuff that relates specifically to why that goes along with sharing and recruitment. So I wanted to start by talking about remembering to talk about why and not what. So this goes for everyone on the team. I don't want you to think this is just for the leaders of the team. All of you are representatives of family ministries. Whether you're intentionally recruiting people or just sharing about your ministry, you are all representatives. And it's so important that you talk about why and not what. I had a pastor/boss when I was at Hillsong, and we were talking about planting ministries and starting churches and stuff like that. And he would always say, build your ministry as if you don't need anyone. What he meant by that was build it to require the least amount of people possible, so that anyone who shows up beyond that is there because they have an understanding of the why behind kids ministry or the why behind youth ministry, and they're not just there because you need them for, turning on lights or stacking chairs or supervising bodies. They really understand the why behind the what. A second thing that goes along with recruitment is understanding the language that you're using to talk about the family ministries team. It is an amazing team to be on, but we also talked about that it's a hard team to be on. And I know the conversation often goes, you have your friend from church, how was your Sunday morning with kids? How was your Friday night with youth? And the first thing out of our mouth is like, oh my goodness, there was this kid, and he would not stop running around. He kept going on stage, and he was playing with the wires and blah, 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 blah. Even if you feel like it's important to share what happened, in your morning, that doesn't really give a great picture of, how you feel about kids or how you feel about youth or why the team is important. It's so important that we check our language when we're talking about kids and youth, especially if you're recruiting, but even just in general. People can figure out pretty quickly what your heart is by the way you talk, out of the heart flows. That's what we're talking about. An additional point along with this is especially if you're intentionally recruiting but just talking about family ministries in general, is to remember that you're not trying to prove to them why they should be on this team. It's kind of similar to when you're witnessing to someone about Jesus. You don't need to prove to them why Jesus exists. You don't need to prove to them why the Bible is right and they're wrong. All you're required to do when you witness is just share what you've seen, share what you've heard, share your experience. Now, the same goes for the family ministries team. You don't need to prove to them why they should be there. And like we said before, you don't need to tell them what you need them for, but you really just need to share why. Why are you on the kids team? What have you experienced on that team? How have you seen God move in family ministries? And that is more than enough. So as we wrap up, this is what we've gone through. We talked about why is why important. We talked about the world's why. We talked about the church's why. We talked about Slate's why. We talked about your why, and we talked about sharing why. Something to reflect on when this is done. I really want you to think about someone that impacted you as a kid or a teenager. Might be, a grandparent, a teacher, a friend, hopefully a kids leader or a youth leader from church. Whether the experience is positive or negative, or the relationship was positive or negative, we know that the things that happen to us as kids and as teenagers, or relationships that we've had, have impacted us for the rest of our lives. So we need to give that same credit to the kids and teenagers now in a good way, and realize that, you could be that person for them now. And to acknowledge as well, you're not just impacting a finite human being, but you're impacting someone's eternal, lifelong existence. Not just, 90 years, 80 years, 101 years, whatever it is, but an eternity for someone. I really hope that this has challenged you or inspired you in some way. Maybe you already had your reason before you watched this, your really good reason why you're on the team, and I'm so thankful that you do. If you didn't, I hope this encourages you to figure it out, whether you take time to think about your personal reasons why you're involved, or you take time to find a reason outside of yourself. All of this to say, though, obviously, whether you have a personal connection to family ministries or not, the greatest reason behind what we're doing is always going to be Jesus. Your encounters and your experience with Jesus are going to be your greatest weapon on this team, as any team, but especially kids and youth. And it should always be our greatest joy to share what we found. So if you don't have a personal reason, if you can't find a reason outside of yourself, if the population isn't enough, if the Bible's reasons aren't enough, if Slate's reasons aren't enough, then I hope that, the knowledge that you have of the joy you've experienced living life with Jesus is reason enough for that. So there's so much more I'd love to go into. This session could go on for hours and hours in a million different directions, but we are going to finish it off here. I'd just like to highlight some of the future sessions that are coming, at least for the kids team. We're going to talk about relationship building, so within the team, with your teammates, with the kids, and with the parents as well. So we're also going to talk about building safe environments, both physically and mentally. So physically, I mean like literally safe buildings and safe rooms, so fire code stuff, lockdown drills, that kind of thing, but then mentally safe spaces as well. So spaces that any kind of person can walk into and feel welcome and feel safe. So whether you have someone from a different cultural background, or someone with maybe a differently abled member in their family, that they all feel welcome to come to your ministry. We're also going to talk about using story, so how to use curriculum and build off that, and also just the importance of story, especially in kids ministry. And then finally, at some point, we are going to talk about behavior management, so that's always a fun one. Again, thank you so much for watching this training. It's been a huge honor to share this with you guys. Please let me know if you have any questions, or your leaders as well. They'd be happy to share, and I'll see you at our next training.